Hi, Lily. Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I was just finishing up another interview. Thank you for being patient.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. I like you're in a voice studio, aren't you?
Yeah. It was the only way to have like high-speed internet for this was
Yeah.
in the studio because the rest is all wireless in the house. This is the only place that's wired. So I was like, oh, I'll just do it here.
And I mean flawless sound too in the background, you know.
Yeah, there's a good mic. There's a good mic. I'm a little bit far from it, but yeah, that's good.
Is that where you record a lot of your voiceover work
This is
at
where it all
home?
happens. Yep.
Wow. What
Yep.
does it take? I'm curious right away to what does it take to kind of build your own home studio in a sense and be able to do that, especially now. I mean, especially the days we are now with the COVID restriction stuff. I mean, that would be the way to go. But when did you decide to do that, and how did you come about it?
I built my first studio was in a closet, and that was about 23 years ago or something like that.
Wow.
So yeah, it was. I had a mentor, and he had a home studio, and then I would always go to his house to record. And then one day, he was a DJ at a radio station, and he got transferred. And he said, "Don't worry, you can do this on your own." I was like, "What?" And so he told me, buy this, buy that, and he plugged everything. I had no idea how anything worked. He just plugged it
Wow.
for me and kind of said like, "See you later." So I worked in my closet for a while, and then over the years, the clients became more and more serious, and I
Mm-hmm.
started to do recording broadcast gigs. So then, I really needed a real studio, and it's blood, sweat, and tears, man. It's just like this was built by a friend of mine, and I mean, we got some plywood and, and just built basically like a little house in my
Yeah.
house, you know. So, but it's great because an ISO booth really because the thing is there's two components to sound. One is acoustics, how the sound moves in your space. And so that, that's padding these panels that you see there. And then the other thing is you is soundproofing, and that's like you isolating yourself from any noise sources. So the more
Mm-hmm.
you move up the sort of voice acting food chain, the more your environment should be very, very quiet. So to do that, it's easier if you isolate yourself with like an extra little house in your house. But
Mm-hmm.
I had for years I had a garage, and I used the garage. I lived at that time, I lived in the country, so it was kind of easier. I would freak out when my neighbor decided to mow the lawn, but
Oh no.
it was, yeah. But but we kind of had a deal going. He would let me know, and that way, if I had a recording, I could just move it around. But yeah, you can do. You don't need this to start, but it's definitely these days if you want to really work. Eventually, at some point, getting a good space that is isolated is very helpful to put clients at ease, to let them know, hey, this is going to sound great, and they're not going to have to worry about any weird noises.
No question. How has this whole situation with pandemic affected voiceover work? Is there more of that since we're not going out, for auditions in person, in a sense? So is there more kind of, things trending towards voiceover work you've noticed, or is there less in general because the industry's kind of, behind on stuff? What has it been like in your experience?
It's been booming. The voice
Wow.
sector has been booming for years, and in this pandemic, it just went up because a lot of productions. First of all, a lot of companies just needed messaging to address COVID, whether it's to let people know what safety precautions they're taking or what safety precautions their clients should take. So there was just a lot more messaging, and this will happen in any kind of catastrophe or anything that's going on. Voice will be a part of that. And as far as video games and animation, all the studios said, you guys get your home studio because we're going to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
We have deadlines, and we know you can do it. And so a lot of productions ended up, even a friend of mine works a lot for Ubisoft, recording video games, and they sent him a microphone even. They're just like, figure
Wow.
it out, yeah. So,
Here's the equipment,
so
go.
yeah, exactly. So yes, the voice sector is booming. COVID has not stopped that. If anything, it increased the workload. In fact, now it's kind of not slowing down because it's always busy, but it's just more normal now, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
for this time of year. But when it first started, the first 4 months were just absolutely insane. So for people who are out of work, especially actors who already have like a sort of a leg up because they have training. Voice recording, voiceovers, voice acting, it's a great thing to get into. It doesn't happen overnight. You got to learn the
Right.
ropes, and it takes some time to build your client list. But it's booming, and it's not going to go back, because voice is the human element in all of our productions, and we communicate via media, so it's not going anywhere. It's the
Hmm.
human element that we need, and we need the human element more and more. So yeah, it's just going to keep going.
How did you get into voiceover work? And someone who's looking for it, because I mean, there's a lot of actors, and you have an agent. Like, usually ask, like, there's different areas. Like, oh, do you want to model? Do you want to? There's different divisions and stuff, and voiceover is always kind of at the end there. But how does someone get into voiceover work? Like, can anyone do it? Do you need to have that? Sometimes it's thought of, oh, you need to have a specific voice, or a voice that's recognizable or distinguishable in some way. How does one start up and decide to get into voiceover work?
I don't think there's a voice at all. I think whatever your voice is, there's a place in the industry for you. I
Hmm.
think if you have a love or a connection with your voice in some way, and sometimes it's not your voice. Like some people, for instance, they get into animation because they love imitating people, and they can do tons of accents, and they're just really good at imitating people. So it's not straight up the voice, it's kind of an acting thing. For singers, they just have a strong connection with their voice. So that's what can start it. The one common denominator is you really have to want to do it, because it's a long haul. It's being an artist. So that
Yeah.
means, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. One gets started, there's different ways, there are different paths for everybody. One good way to start would be on pay to play sites, like Voice 123, for instance. So those
Interesting.
sites, you can pay for membership, and then you can get a microphone. You don't have to get the most expensive one. A more expensive microphone will not get you more jobs, as long as it's a good microphone.
Hmm.
And you can get one for a couple of $100, and you have a quiet space. So if you have a closet, stick some clothes in it, and just, as long as you can be comfortable in it, and start recording. Obviously, if you're an actor, you're going to have a leg up, because it does require acting, no matter what sector of the industry you're going into.
Sure.
You have, your acting chops are going to serve you. If you don't have any training, get training. That's really, really important. But it doesn't mean you can't just go out there and try it.
Hmm.
But training will help you increase your bookings. And then once you kind of know what you're doing a little bit more, I would say like a couple of years maybe on pay to play sites, and you kind of start to get to know your voice, and you're training now. After that, I would consider making a professional demo, and then you can seek out agents. But the truth of the matter is, in today's day and age, in 2020, you really don't need an agent. And in fact, what will help you get an agent is the fact that you can prove that you're able to get work on your own, that you're hireable all on your own. So it's not like in the old days, like even 20 years ago when I started, you got an agent, and it was like, oh, here you go. Here's an exposure to all these clients. It's so competitive now with agencies, and so many professional, recognizable actors are in that sphere, that it's a little bit overpopulated. Whereas, and the pay to play sites are populated as well. There's a lot of people on there, but it's a little bit easier to find your way and get clients there. And then the more you have them, the better you are, the more confident you are, the better your professional demos will be. And then you can get an agent, and who knows, you could get big gigs that way as well.
So yeah, I was asking you, I was going to ask you next question was, how do you kind of get a reel? Can you get a reel just like in advance? Because I know, obviously it's crucial to have a reel for you to even submit to anything. They need to hear your voice. Do you need to get one professionally? Could you even do kind of like a starter's reel in a sense and put one together by yourself? How would you approach that?
It depends the sector of the industry that you're interested in working in. So if you want to
Mhm.
do video games and animation, I recommend get a coach first, get some training. When the coach feels you're ready, then go do a demo, get a professional demo done. If you're getting into commercials and narration and more straightforward work, um, you don't even need a demo to start. I mean, you can
Interesting.
record, yeah, you could do a demo, like you could read any kind of copy that you find on a website, or from an audio, or from a book, even anything that's got copy, just so people can hear your voice. But really, and just so you can upload something to the site, it doesn't need to be anything fancy. But really, like those pay to play sites, for instance, they're audition based. So what
Mm.
happens is you'll just audition the copy that they're provide. The text copy is a sort of a industry word for script or text.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so they'll provide you the copy in the audition, and you'll just read that. So they might not even listen to any of your other demos. And what happens is over time you'll keep those on your computer, all those little auditions that you did. And then
Hmm.
the good ones, you can ask a coach, you can keep a folder and ask your coach, hey, which ones do you think are really good? If you don't know, if you know some of them are really good, either because you booked a job through them, usually that's a really good indicator that you did a good job in the audition, then you can use those as demos. So unless you had to sign, if the client had you sign an NDA to be able to do the audition, then don't use the audition. If it was a confidential project, don't use that audition as a demo. But anything that you record on those pay to play sites, which is why I really recommend trying them, because you're going to be able to build a reel with that on your own. And then
Hmm.
over time, as you get proficient with recording, if you have a good recording software, you can just learn to put music in the background. There are sites where you can buy music and you can just, it's not, rocket science. If you want to put sound effects and all that, that's more complicated. But if you want to just put music in the background, there's a feature in most good audio recording softwares where you can do that, and you make sure your voice is prominent. You don't want the music to be too loud. And then they
Sure.
can be little demos that you add on the pay to play site. And if you have your own website, you can add those there too. And if you have people that want some demos, then you can forward those as well. When it comes to getting professional representation, um, like with a real reputable agent, then you want to get your demo produced by someone professional, whether it's a commercial demo, narration demo, animation, or video games. In those instances, when you're going to be submitted via a real agent, in those
Hmm.
cases, you want to get the training first and then hire the demo producer, which will usually come as a reference from your coach, and record a professional demo. But other barring getting a real agent to represent you, which you really need in demo in animation and video games, barring that, you can just record anything you want.
Wow.
And yeah.
What were those pay to play sites you mentioned? Is there different options for those? What are some of them where someone could go
Yeah,
and find?
so Voice 123 is one I really like. They're very
Hmm.
transparent. It's very easy. You decide what you charge, and you charge via your own invoicing, whether you want to invoice through PayPal or through an invoicing system that you have. Um, and so I like that you can transact outside of the site when it comes to money. There's VO Planet. There's all kinds. You can just do a search for, a voice audition website. There's Bodalgo is another one, Bodalgo, Bodalgo.
Hmm.
There are several sites. There's one called voices.com. It's less transparent. They force you to transact on the site. It's a good site, but I don't love that part of it,
Hmm.
which is why I recommend Voice 123. But there are other ones. If you do a search online, pay to play site for voices, you'll find them. Or if you even just do a search for voiceovers, just search like voice actor or voiceovers, some sites are going to come up.
Interesting. You've done announcing work also, which is a little bit different in voiceover in a lot of ways. I mean, we're talking about you announced like the Olympic. That's crazy to me. Like that is probably, I don't know, the highest you can do in an announcing industry in a sense, I mean, if you're into sports, maybe announcing a Super Bowl would be great, but
Yeah,
Olympics, a
yeah,
whole
yeah.
different. First of all, how did you land that gig? And then go into telling me the difference between announcing, how do you approach that too, that line of work?
hmm Well, I got that gig. I was really, it was my second really professional announcing gig. So it was a
Wow.
big, big, big step up. I was really nervous. Um, so I got that gig because somehow it was through my own contacts. I had participated in some, I used to work in the music industry as sort of a parallel career that I had for a while when I was
Mm.
younger. And I worked at an event where I was a judge for some musical acts. And I befriended somebody who was on a committee for the games or something like that. And he knew that I was doing voiceover work. And I think he referred me to a friend of his to do an event. It was like a year before the Olympics, like the Olympics countdown. And when I did that event, it was so much fun. I said, "Oh," and I had decided when this, I'll always remember this. When Vancouver, that city got the Olympic bid, I remember I told my roommate at the time, I said, "I'm going to work for the Olympics. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to work for them." And sure enough, I got the countdown thing, which was like a year before. But when I worked that event, I made friends with everybody. And then I asked them, I said, hey, do you know who's doing the actual Olympics? And they gave me a contact. And they actually also referred me. So, I kind of like my name got through to them and I contacted them. And then eventually they got back to me and I did a bunch of interviews for them and a bunch of auditions and I got the gig. So, and it just goes to show because that was a really high profile gig. I mean, that's like you
Yes.
said, that's top of the food chain. And I pretty much got that on my own. I then included at the time my agent who still represents me actually. I got him involved to negotiate for me because it was like I was like I just want to do the gig. I just want to
Yeah.
show up.
You probably
Like
could undersell
I
yourself
don't
on
get,
a
yeah.
gig like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. I
Yeah.
was like, I'll do it for free.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of times, like I'll be like that. I'll just do the gig. I don't care. I just love it. So he stepped in and he helped me, coordinate and get paid and all that. So that's something else that you can do also to get an agent, by the way. If you get a big gig, you can approach an
Hmm.
agent and say, hey, I need some help negotiating this contract.
Oh, they
So
will take you then.
they will take you. They'll take a percentage, but they'll take you, and it's a
Yes.
good way to get in the door. It's a good way
Sure.
to get in the door. So yeah, so that's kind of how that happened. So it just goes to show that you can get work on your own. You should never give that up. Don't put all your eggs into the agent basket. It's kind of an old way of thinking, and it's just not the way the industry works anymore. Just
Yeah.
go out and be fearless and get it on your own. You like those Instagram likes? It's the same thing with demos. You just throw them out there, and somebody's gonna like them. And
Hmm.
eventually you kind of figure out who your niche client, like what kind of clients always come back to you. And that's how you build your business. But your other question was, how do you prepare for that? Well, honestly, I got coached on that because I didn't know
Hmm.
really what I was doing. And so I got coached, and that gave me a lot of confidence. And I just read they gave me a script in advance, and I just read that script like as often as I could. And sometimes you only get the script the night before, or sometimes just a little bit before. There's some last minute changes, but I just like chew out those words because when you're live, you can't make a mistake.
Right.
Like you just have to be so on the ball, and you become with experience. You start to know when you have to, because the announcer's job is very much, you're in charge of transitions. So there's act A and act B, and you're in between making sure that it's all flawless. And sometimes, like the lighting department or the sound department, or somebody's having a problem, something's not working. And so you kind of have to get in there and say, ladies and gentlemen, and just come up with something that's, sort of acceptable, and you can add a little bit of humor if you want, but it has to be sort of very PG. um but so it's a different ball game. But at that time I just like chewed those words out and was just ready. And you just have your headphones on and you have the producer telling you, okay, go. And it's very, very hot, very intense. And you just uh, become very, very alert. And that's
Hmm.
really the job of announcer. It's a high wire act. Like, and every time you open your mouth, like especially if you're trying to fill in the gap because one department is not it's not working well, like you open your mouth and you're like, it's like jumping off a cliff. You're like, I
Yeah.
might be making
What's
a
gonna
big
come out,
mistake here. No, but you sometimes you have to kind of go on instinct. Like I know
Yeah.
I can save the day here, but when you open your mouth, you're like, okay, I'm gonna do it, and then you're like, and then once you save the day, you're like, yes, okay, that was a good call, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a bit. I always say if you want to do announcing, I think improv is really
Hmm.
good training for that because it just teaches you to get really good at off the cuff. And you do have to be very, very alert and in the moment when you're announcing.
Is getting into announcing similar to getting into voiceover work, or is there a different pathway usually for that to get into that line of work?
I think a lot of people end up announcing. They're like journalists who work in TV, or
Hmm.
they're people who had a path in television. So yes, it can be a different path. It just depends. Like if you do games and stuff like that. For me, I do a lot of events like galas and awards. That's very similar. It'd be the same kind of path. You eventually, for those kinds of gigs, you would need an agent because they're the ones with the contacts to the award shows and the galas and all that kind of the conferences. And also by building your own clientele, you'll get corporate clients, and then they'll put trade shows on and galas and awards as well. So that's a little bit more traditional. But in terms of announcing for sports, let's say,
Hmm.
um, that's a little bit more through TV. It's a bit of a different path. A lot of people will come from broadcast journalism, and they'll also they'll be producers of their own shows, and then they kind of move up the food chain that way. So it's a bit of a different ball game.
Hmm. you started off doing acting too. I mean, that was part of your journey, and it is to a lot of voiceover actors. How did those two worlds kind of, you mentioned doing voiceover work too, the acting comes into play and so much. It makes sense, especially if you're doing characters. How does the acting sense helped you out, and how much do you still go back to the acting work when you're not doing voiceover work? How prominent is that still in your career?
Acting is, it's funny because when I was younger, I was, I wanted to be an actress. I had a
Hmm.
huge connection to my voice, but it was kind of a separate thing. I studied acting and then I started, I accidentally got into voice over work because some DJ, I was working at a restaurant and some DJs would hang out there and they said, "Oh, you have a great voice." And then one day they called me into the studio and I started um, recording voice work, and then somebody mentored me and I just started that way. So for me there were two different worlds. I was like acting and voice. And then over the years, those worlds kind of merged when about, I would say 10 years ago, 15 years ago now, probably, on breakdowns, which are basically the descriptions of every project. So
Hmm.
on breakdowns, you would start to read the directions would be a please sound conversational. Don't sound like an announcer. So then it was like, oh, wait, we scratch our heads like, what does that mean? Like, what do you mean? Like, I'm the announcer. Like, I'm supposed to announce. Like, that's pretty straightforward. But then all of a sudden, it was like, no, you had to be conversational. You had to be natural, and that's where, for me, the acting started to. I had to bring my acting to the game, and it was really a big learning curve because even though I was an actress, and when I was on camera, I was fine, or on stage, I was fine. But for voiceover work, I would just put these on and go, "Hello, how are you?" I would just
Yeah,
do this
yeah.
announcer thing, and that was out. Like nobody wanted to hear that anymore. And so it was years of training to kind of bring my acting that I would do on camera behind the mic. And it was a crazy transition. So now what's happened is over the years, that conversational thing that we started to see on breakdowns about 15 years ago is the norm. You know,
Yeah.
like it always says on every break, we don't want an announcer, no announcers, no announcers. So that's why I tell people who want to, you know, think they want to become an announcer, it's like that may be called an announcer, but that's not what you want to be. You want to be an actor. So you really need to
Interesting.
train. Yeah, you need to be an actor because you're going to need to get behind those words, even if there's 5 words like, get our new, whatever corn dogs for 1.99, whatever it is. Like you're going to have to get behind there and make those specific to you so that they sound as natural as possible, however crazy and silly the copy might be. So that's really the game now. And in fact, when I go, I get very busy. So when I get very busy, unless I happen to get on a show or something, which happens for me very far and few between, because I usually will play smaller roles on TV. But usually I'll be in acting class. But when it gets really busy, I have to take a pause because I can only do so much. And then
Hmm.
if that lasts too long where I'm not in class, my bookings start to go down. Like I have to go back to acting class. And every time I go back to acting class, I book more work. It's like it's just one of these things where now more than ever, unless you're going to get into some acting training on some level, I'm not saying you have to be, Robert De Niro or Meryl Streep, but you need to start to know what it feels like to own what you're saying and pretend as if you came up with those words and to really commit to those words. Because if you just read them, somebody else that's able to get behind those words is going to book the job. And you're going to
Yep.
sit there wondering, like, why am I never booking? Because you're not really committed. You're just reading the words. The job is more than just reading the words. Now, if you're reading voicemail copy or, there's some things where you don't need to be an actor, but those realms, although they can be lucrative, they're just very small. If you have the acting, you're going to be able to work in every sector. If you don't have the acting, you're going to be very limited to like voicemail, e-learning, and announcing, like proper announcing, like we talked about, which is a skill in itself. I'm not dissing that at all. I have a lot of respect for announcers. But if unless you bring the acting in, you're going to be limited. So you can start with voicemails and e-learning, you know, to get you started, but take some training so that you can widen your horizons as you go.
No question. I've seen, I do hosting work and all sorts of stuff when it comes to that on camera. And the industry's changed so much. You don't want hosty hosts, like, oh, well, like over the top. They want people who are conversational, like you said. It's spot on. People who can relate to you. People somewhere in Nebraska, we're like, oh, this person reminds me of someone I know. Like not someone that's like, oh, they've been coached up. They've been, they do a
Exactly.
formulaic way. I think it's totally about connecting with people and becoming as conversational and relatable to someone anywhere around the country or world as you're kind of their next door neighbor in that sort of way, not like some special speaker celebrity in that way.
Exactly. It's like I want people want to feel like you're speaking to me
Yep.
and only me, you know. So, and the more conversational, natural you are, the more relatable you will be. So it's not something you
Hmm.
have to like work on individually. If you become more conversational with which acting will help you with, um, everything else will fall into place.
No question. You mentioned voiceover work for video games. Obviously, you voiced over some most iconic game like Assassin's Creed. Uh, Tell me the work on video games, because that's something that you hear about a lot now. Video game voiceover work, and games are becoming like literally like animated movies in so many ways too. Tell me about your experience on Assassin's Creed and what sort of the world of voiceover work for video games has become.
Video games, I was reading an article yesterday and they were saying that it's $120 billion industry, which is three times more than the Hollywood industry.
Wow.
So, than the movie industry. So, it's massive. The thing about video games, I think if you really want to get into video games, you really, really, really need to consider theater training and proper theater training. I'm not
Mm.
saying go to class once a week. I'm saying you need to work at least a good 10 hours a week. Whether if it's one class, you got to, you're rehearsing your scenes and everything. You just got to put in at least 10 hours a week. I would say 6 to 10 hours a week for a few years, for 2 or 3 years. Be serious about it because you're competing with real actors. A lot of them have stage experience and are theater trained. Um,
Interesting how you mentioned that games are theater and how like the different aspects like announcing would be more improv and acting for like voiceover. Interesting to see how they relate to different fields of acting too in that sense. So I'm really kind of blown away to hear that it's theater that resonates in video games.
Yes, yes. I mean, improv or theater would be good for you anywhere. Those skills are
Hmm.
usable, but because theater video games are so they're the body movements are so important and you learn that on stage. You learn how to move on stage and all that. But also the interesting thing about video games is that the body is kind of in a theater mode, but your head is kind of in a TV film mode. So on
Hmm.
camera classes would be very good too because you still want to maintain that subtle natural thing, which is the equivalent of the conversational thing behind the mic for commercials and narration. You want to do that same thing for video games where you're very natural, it's not pushed or anything, but your body will be more theatrical because the motion capture and all that, it has to be interesting to watch, right? So it has to all translate. So it's huge. It requires a lot more training because we're using real film and TV and stage actors in video games. So it's not something you can just, pull off. That said, there's tons of indie games, video games, and you can, even on pay to play sites, you're going to see breakdowns. There's even Facebook groups where you can get casting notices, and a lot of indie video games will have their breakdowns on there. And you won't need all that crazy acting experience. I mean, you'll be at an advantage, a serious advantage, if you have great acting chops, because we're going to be able to hear that, through the
Yeah.
microphone. You're not going to be filmed, so that the theater, because video games is really two worlds. It's motion capture, which is when we're acting. It's filmed just like film and TV, except they're not cutting scenes. It's all the way through because they don't need to cut scenes. There's cameras all around the stage, four directions. So that's when you're there in person. You don't have a microphone. There's a microphone in your headset. You're good to go. You just act and it's all filmed, recorded, and everything. And then there's indie video games where you'll just record like in my booth, where, like,
Mhm.
for example, I'll record video games like that where you just go line by line for the video game. So there's that. So you can get that kind of work online as well. Um, and in that, it's less important that you do a theater or film acting, but if you have done some training, you're just going to beat the competition because you'll be more convincing. Um, as far as my experience doing Assassin's Creed, I mean, that was the beginning of motion capture. So at the time, for my roles, I did a lot of the sort of background voices. What they did was they put sensors on my face,
Mm.
and like it's funny because like they put sensors on your face so that they're recording your movements, but you can't move too much. So I was like kind of like stuck there, and but it was really cool. We had to all have an Italian accent, and it was actually way harder than I thought. So I was a little underprepared, and I learned a lot working on that game about being professional and being prepared, and how important training is. And if you want to do video games, you just have to love acting so much. And you have to love video games too. Because if you don't understand how video games are and you don't experience them, you're just missing a piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah.
So I would say for any video game fans, like if you're a real fan and you love acting, that's a good place to be to start that kind of career.
Great to hear. All this knowledge that you have, no wonder you put it into like a book form. I started reading your ebooks. I got some copies, so thanks for that. Tell me how that came about. And you have a lot of knowledge. You have a lot of editions, and tell me how you came up with that idea, and in a sense why, and what knowledge will you share about them? Tell us where.
So the books, it's funny because I've always been a note taker. Like since I was a kid, the for when I could write, I had a journal. I've always documented everything. And so for me, it's kind of another one of those creative outlets, if you will. And so for years, people would when you do voice acting, everybody asks you like, how do you do it? How do you get into
Yeah.
it? And there's no dinner, there's no coffee, there's no sleepover that could cover everything that you need to know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So over the years, I just collected a lot of notes, and so for me, it was always a matter of when and not if. And so I thought, okay, well, when I'm going to get really old and nobody will want to hire me anymore, I should like have another career. So I basically started putting together those notes, and created basically the first, three books, which are, Get Clever About Voice Acting and
Yeah.
Announcing, part one, part two, and part three. And part one is all about becoming an artist. Part two is about becoming a technician, because you need to have your own studio and you need to understand sound and how it all works together. And then part three is becoming an entrepreneur, because, like I said, you have to go out and get work on your own and be on those pay to play sites and kind of build yourself a little bit to be more attractive to an agent. Tables are reversed. You used to get an agent to be able to work, and now it's like you need to get work to get the agent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how that came about. It took me a long time because I work a lot, and so I would do like, an hour here, an hour there, but it took forever, to become a decent writer as well, because binge writing is not the same as actually properly writing. So it took a long time, but my idea is to just help people get a sense of what it takes, what's required of you, what's expected of you on the marketplace, so that you can sort of really not waste time going around in circles and chasing your tail doing the wrong things. The entertainment industry is a complicated one. There's no real manual, and my idea was to sort of create a manual, like, okay, this is how you can do it. So that's how it came about. Yeah.
That's so important to have that manual, because like in this industry, in so many ways, where you're doing acting, voiceover work, there's no set path. Like you're a doctor, you go to med school, and then
Exactly.
residency, and then there's a path for many careers carved out. You just need to follow them, and it might take years to do it. But with this industry, sometimes it happens overnight, sometimes it takes decades.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to have that information, to have a starting point, is crucial, because you can be lost in wilderness for years trying to just find the basic steps to get off the ground. So that's hugely important.
Yeah, I mean, that was the idea. I love helping people too. I guess I'm that kind of person that people call on for advice and whatever, even personal, but a lot about work. And so, yeah, it's just kind of like I wish I had a manual like that when I started. I mean,
Mhm.
a lot of the industry was kind of shaping itself when I started. This new kind of what we're dealing with in 2020, kind of it started about 15 years ago, early 2005, 2006. That's when the industry changed a lot, and it kind of morphed itself. But now it's there are ways, and it's you can get lost and also deflated, and that's why the
Oh,
whole message also is like, don't just count on an agent. They're kind of gravy, because you can have an agent and never book work with them, but you could still be making six figures a year. So
hmm.
it's really, honestly, you don't need an agent. Like I know people who make a lot of money, they don't have an agent, or they do, but it's just because once in a while there's something that's really for them and they'll book that, but and maybe not, so but you can always book work on your own once you kind
Hmm.
of know a little bit what you're doing. So yeah, it's hopefully it helps people find themselves in the industry.
When we talk about kind of acting and theater, like there's always like, can you survive doing that? As a starving artist, what is kind of potential the livelihood you can do with voiceover work? Is it more in a sense bankable and stable than acting and theater? Like, can you have a career supported, even if you're not at the upper echelon, but let's say like kind of like a working voiceover actor, does it kind of satisfy your day-to-day life?
Absolutely. And that's the thing. And that's why I think this is so important right now because so many actors, they can't do stage work. There's less film and TV work. And the thing about voice acting or voiceovers is that it's very steady. Your
Hmm.
clients, you build your clientele. It can take a few years. It doesn't happen overnight. But once those clients, they keep coming back, you can do really, really well. Like I wanted to act, but what really pays the bill, I'm making way more money doing voiceovers to the point where now sometimes my manager asks me to do some low budget gigs and I'm like on for film and I'm like I can't justify a day out of the studio for unless it's like a really great director or something really good, but
Sure.
generally like I can't do the low budget things because I'm like it's too I do too well in the studio. So you can do really 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 well, and the six figures is not like an anomaly.
Mm.
You need to find your niche market. It's not going to happen tomorrow morning. It's not the first year you do voiceovers you'll do six figures. It can happen. Hey, anything can happen. But
Sure, in this industry, yeah.
yeah, anything can happen. But in general, it takes time, but it's like however much you put into it, and also with what I love about voice acting is you can really home in on your niche market. Whereas like for acting, you're kind of you can paint yourself like I'm this kind of actor, and these you can typecast yourself. Um, and you can do well that way. I've done that, but you're just more limited. It's harder to knock on casting directors' doors and have them give you a chance. Whereas for voice acting, like I can reach out and I can reach out to anyone on LinkedIn or through their website, or and I can reach out plus casting directors plus agents. Those are all gravy, but I can actually go out there and get my own clients. And like that's for me, that's worked amazing. I did that. I remember in 2010. I had a slower year and I would do like once a month, I would do 2, 3 days of just like reaching out to people. And those clients still hire me today. So
Mm.
whoever gets on the train now, they'll be on the train with you for many, many years, So, and I have some of the same clients. I've had them for 20 years.
Wow.
You grow with them, they grow with you. So
Relationships. That's
yeah, relationships, which is a lot easier to do in voice acting because it's kind of like a business, whereas like for acting it's more like the industry and it's a little bit more closed off. If you don't have the right
mm-hmm.
agent, you're not going to get through the door. You have to just jump through so many more hoops to be able to get that agent that's going to be able to open doors for you. Whereas for voice acting, it's kind of the agent is gravy. You can do so much on your own. So I would say yes, it's a lot more stable. Now, not all the work is as sexy. you know
Mm-hmm.
it's not always like if you have to record e-learning, like yeah, it's not that fascinating or anything like that, but hey, beats doing the dishes,
Totally.
and it pays well. So, and audiobooks for actors, I mean audiobooks, yes, you'll have to work harder than just doing a little day on set, but either it's so rewarding and you're reading good material and you're getting paid for it. So yes, I think it's a great career. um if you're already acting, just get on the train because it's not going anywhere anyway. So even if you don't get on the train now, just get on the train at some point because
There's work,
it's
that's
happening.
the
There's
thing,
work.
is there's
Yeah,
more stability and work available than in other fields of
that's right.
entertainment.
Like, even in the audiobook sector, like authors are not, they haven't stopped writing because of the pandemic. Like,
Hmm.
there's more and more training there was already a ton of e-learning, but there's even more now because people are working from home. So, yeah, it's just, there's a lot of work.
Do you have to be in LA to do this? I mean, unless you have like a studio and a setup, you can kind of be all over the country too. Because with acting, you kind of have to be for auditions in LA in a sense like that, or big or New York. But you can do this kind of from all over, right?
Unless you want to get into animation and video games, then you should be in a big market, probably like LA. And if you're in Canada, go to Vancouver.
Mhm.
Um, Anything else, you can work from home. And if you want to do announcing more like live events, then in your community, find out who's putting events on in your community, because you can go out in your community and do tons of work. If you have two or three event producers that you're dealing with in the general region, you can go do a lot of work. So, but in terms of voiceover work, no, you can be anywhere. I mean, look, I'm in LA because of acting, but I really don't need to be here for voice work. I mean,
Mhm.
I don't, um, because I don't do much animation video games. But so yeah, you can be anywhere you want, and especially now, like whatever was left before of the remnants of we want to see you in studio, that's all fallen apart. It's probably not going to go back.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to do indie games and if you want to do anime, Houston is a place where they're recording a lot of anime, but and LA as well. But there's indie games you can again do wherever people will record you from your studio. So as long as you do, if you're playing in the big games that involve motion capture, you have to be in LA or Vancouver.
Yeah.
Otherwise, or Montreal. Montreal is also in Toronto in Canada because the big game producers are there.
That's
Ubisoft
right.
is there.
Yeah. There's
So so for Canadians listening, that's a good spot to be, for that kind of work because those companies are there. But they'll still cast out of LA. You know,
Mhm.
so it's LA, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver. Those are the places you want to be for that kind of work. The rest, be anywhere you want.
Interesting. We're just such a busy schedule. What do you do in your free time? Like when you find free time, what sort of things do you like to get away mentally to kind of just, for as hobbies or interests? What are some things you kind of would Lily gets away to from just clearing your mind?
So we're big on hiking and camping. That's kind of like my saving grace usually. Yeah, it's funny because for years I was working and going to school, going to acting school, my class, I have a class I would go to, and then writing, and then it's like when I finished the books, so now I'm doing all this promo, I was like, oh wow, like, I have time to just like exist, but there's always so much work to do when you do voiceover work, even if you're not recording, you have to reach out to people and there's so much work to do.
Mhm.
But what really helps me, keeps me sane through it all, and I really recommend this. Different things work for different people, but for me, nature is my way to just because the industry can be a little bit like you can just get in your head about it and
Oh
just like
yeah.
acting and it's all this and it's all that. And so yeah, for me, nature is a big one. For my husband, he likes to cook, so everybody's got their thing that they do, but definitely, we're hikers, campers, and snowboarders in the winter. We just love snowboarding.
Cover all the
So
bases
that's
of nature.
yeah,
That's great.
yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
getting out of that studio too, because it could get lonely in that square
Yeah,
space.
it really does. Like the studio thing is like, when this happened at the beginning, the COVID thing, it wasn't a big change for me. I was like, okay, whatever, it's the same for me. But then it cut off all my ways of seeing people, like my acting class and all our friends and whatever. And I was like, oh my God, this is brutal. Like, and now it's like, I really need to get out of here. And then in LA, we had fires everywhere. So
Yeah.
like our hiking season, all of our camping trips got canceled. All the parks like canceled our camping getaways. So this year was really, really hard. Like a lot of people, it's just like mentally and it's like it drags you down. But yeah, barring that, yeah, nature is a lifesaver and exercise. Exercise is good
Good
too.
for your
That keeps
health
me
and
sane.
for your
Yeah.
mind too. Yeah, no, those
Yeah.
are great
Yeah.
things. Those are really good things, especially when you do something so kind of like I said, in a room, in a sound room, or inside, kind of with no walls sometimes, or no windows, especially.
Yeah,
It's
well,
good
that's why I
to.
put a window, like you're seeing me through my window now, and I put a
Oh, great.
window into my studio because I was like, for years I was like in a basement in a dark, and you
Yeah,
spend like 8 hours in there or whatever, 6 hours, and I was just like, oh God, like I feel like a zombie. Whereas now at least I can look out. So yes, if you do build a professional studio at some point, think about having a window and pointing it to another window because that's what my window does. It's like pointed to another window. So yes, I recommend
smart.
that.
Learn through the process. There
Yeah.
you go. I had a blast talking to you. I think you shared just a ton of great information about this industry, and I think the books are great. Tell us where you could find your books and the titles and where they can get it. Anyone can get them if they're interested.
So the books are called Get Clever About Voice Acting and Announcing, and there's a part one, a part two, and a part three. You can get them on Amazon. Get Clever About Voice Acting and Announcing, and yeah, they're very affordable, and hopefully will give you all the information you need about the industry. And I always encourage people. There's my email in there in the books, and if you have any other additional questions after you're done reading the books, feel free to shoot them off. I try to respond to every inquiry.
That's great. That's that firsthand kind of, mentorship in
Yeah,
a sense too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
so happy to do it because also it keeps me posted on what people need to know and the questions that they're asking. So it helps me address, when one person asks me a question, it sort of helps everybody. So I'm happy to do it. And thank you so much for having me. It was such a treat
oh,
chatting with you.
absolutely. Thank you for your patience too. It's been kind of a busy day today, but I'm glad I
All
got a
good.
chance to talk to you. And
Yeah,
I'm halfway done with the first volume, so I'm gonna finish up the other two. I'm curious,
sweet,
for sure. And now
sweet.
hearing you talk about it, it makes me want to attempt it. Why not? If you don't take a
Yes, you
shot,
should.
you'll
If
never
you
know if you can.
exactly. Just do it. Just do it. And the thing is keep expectations low
Yeah.
so that you don't get deflated. And just have fun with it. That's the whole thing. I say like keep expectations low, have fun with it, and then if you keep doing it, eventually, whoop, the, it cracks the nut. You know what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
it's all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm getting work, and people are, oh, I got a good, this demo is doing really well, and so yeah, it eventually just it's like cookie crumbles. You just eventually just adds up.
There you go. Are you on social media? Can people follow you there and find you?
Yes, yes, I'm at Lili Wexu, so my name is a little weird. So Liliwexu. It's a strange name.
Tell me where. I was
It's,
curious to ask you
it's
the
like
origins of it. I had to.
it's like sounds Asian, right? And I'm like not Asian.
Yes.
But you know what's funny is it so the real name is was a Romanian Jewish name. Well, actually Austrian name, Weiss, so Weiss. And for some reason my grandfather changed it. We don't know why, but he was a boxer in Romania in the 30s and he
Uh-huh.
changed his name to Wexu, but so and there was some story that he came off the boat and he said it was it was that they changed it when he came off the boat to Canada. And but actually we found a book that he wrote and he already had changed it to Wexu. And then it's funny because my dad decided to call me Lily but spelled the French way because my mom is French Canadian. I'm from Quebec originally.
Mm-hmm.
So Lily the French way, but Lily and Wexu just sounds Asian. And what's funny is that my grandfather, my father, my uncle, and my aunt are all acupuncturists.
Oh, wow. Look
So
at that.
yeah, yeah. So it's so funny. Like I have this Asian name and my family does some Asian, like medicine.
Mm.
And yeah, there's no Asian in me.
Well,
That's the
maybe
story.
the one of those 23 and me tests and you learn something else.
Exactly. Maybe. But it's actually made up. There's like 8 of us on the planet, but it's ninja. I like it. I like it a
And
lot.
and that's how, and your name is just your for social media. That's
Yeah,
how.
Lily Wexu. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Lily. Really enjoyed talking to you. Hopefully, I get to connect with you. I'll read the books and I'll definitely let you know.
Yes, yes. Give me any feedback you have and any questions you have. I'll be
Absolutely.
super happy
This
to
was
help any
great.
way I can.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate your time.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Stay safe and healthy. Talk soon.
Okay, thanks.
Bye
Bye.
bye.